I never imagined that a single organ could carry so much weight, yet there I was, staring at the hospital's sterile white walls, feeling my heart twist in ways I hadn't thought possible. He, my ex, lay in a bed across the room, tubes snaking into his arms and chest, pale and fragile, a man who had once been the center of my world. The same man who had shattered it without a second thought. When he had called me that morning, his voice weak but insistent, I had hesitated. "I need help," he had said, and it wasn't just some vague plea for emotional comfort. He was dying. Liver failure, the doctor had explained on speakerphone, leaving me breathless not from shock, but from a cold, unyielding familiarity with pain. I knew too well the fragility of life, and yet he was the last person I wanted to save. But there it was. The truth I couldn't deny. I still loved him in the quietest, most painful corners of my heart, the places no one could see. In love, as much as betrayal had tried to erase it, has a way of forcing your hands, I agreed. The process was grueling, a surgical odyssey that left me hollow and raw. I lay awake in recovery afterward, my own body aching, listening to the steady beeping of monitors in the adjacent room where he rested. My gift, my liver, or part of it, was inside him now, sustaining the man who had once walked out on me with a smile, leaving me to pick up pieces of my dignity. The nurses called it bravery, the doctors called it heroism, I called it necessity. Something in me insisted that if he lived, if he survived this, I needed to witness it. I needed to see whether the man I had loved so recklessly, who had abandoned me with nothing but memory and scars, still had a heart capable of gratitude, or if he would, somehow, twist this miracle into a weapon against me. When he finally opened his eyes, weak but aware, his gaze found mine, and for a moment, I almost believed in redemption. He whispered my name, a fragile, hoarse sound that seemed to tremble with vulnerability and something else, something I couldn't place. Regret, perhaps, or the old familiar arrogance that always seemed to cling to him. "You didn't have to," he murmured, voice trembling. "I can't believe you." I offered a small, controlled smile. "I know." That was all I could give. Words were insufficient, and sentiment was dangerous. I had learned that. In the days that followed, I watched him recover. I watched the color return to his cheeks, the strength return to his hands. I listened as doctors praised him for his resilience, oblivious to the subtle truth. The resilience was not entirely his. It was mine too, in a different, more quiet way. And yet, beneath my calm exterior, a storm began to form. Every time he laughed too easily, every time he took a breath without remembering the debt he owed me, my chest tightened. I remembered the nights I cried alone, the moments I wondered if love itself had betrayed me, and now here he was, alive, well, and utterly dependent on the life I had given him. It would have been enough for anyone else to feel gratitude, to be humbled, but not him. There was something in the way he moved, in the way he looked at me, an expectation that I would continue to serve, to forgive, to forget. My anger simmered beneath a veneer of calm, a silent promise forming in the depths of my heart. I had saved him. I had given him life, but I had not surrendered my spirit. And soon he would see that the gift I had sent came with consequences he had never imagined. The days following his discharge were quieter than I expected, but not peaceful. The house felt too small, the air too heavy with the unspoken. He moved through it like he owned it, though he had barely touched my life in months before the transplant. And now, because of me, he lived. A part of me wanted to scream at the unfairness of it, but I reminded myself, patience, patience. Every storm begins quietly. He called me one afternoon, his voice tentative. "Can you come over? Aya, I need some help, help." The word echoed in my mind like a challenge. He wasn't asking for advice. He wasn't asking for a friendly check-in. He was asking me to tend to him, to be the caretaker for the man who had once left me bleeding emotionally, expecting the world to bend around him. I agreed, calmly, precisely, because I knew that showing hesitation would only feed his sense of entitlement. When I arrived, he greeted me with that same fragile smile that once made me melt, though now it carried a strange mixture of weakness and arrogance. He limped slightly from the surgery, his body still recovering, but his eyes were sharp, observant. Calculating, I followed him into his small apartment, noting the neatness he had imposed on chaos, everything in its place, just like he liked it. "You didn't have to come," he murmured, a little out of breath. I can manage. I know," I said, sitting in the chair he gestured toward. "But you asked," and that was all the conversation he got. Over the next few days, I began to help him meals, medications, small errands. On the surface, it looked like care, like kindness, but I was meticulous. Every action, every gesture carried subtle precision. I washed the dishes he couldn't reach, folded his clothes in ways he wouldn't notice but would irritate him subconsciously, prepared his meals exactly according to dietary restrictions while spicing them just enough to be bland. I organized his medications, double, checking every dosage and timing, knowing that his arrogance would make him trust my diligence blindly. I watched him, the man who had once walked out of my life so casually, the man who had believed he could charm or manipulate his way through anything, now relied entirely on me for survival. The irony wasn't lost on me, and yet the calmness I projected fooled him completely. He smiled at me, unaware of the storm brewing behind my composed eyes. One evening, as I set his dinner on the table, he looked at me with a gratitude that made me pause, not real gratitude, not humility, but the kind that smelled of expectation. "You've really gone above and beyond," he said softly. "I don't know what I'd do without you." I gave a small nod. "You're welcome." His words should have satisfied me, but instead they ignited a slow, burning fury. He didn't see me. He didn't see my exhaustion, my sacrifice, the nights I had lain awake worrying about whether he would survive, or whether my decision to help him would destroy me too. All he saw was convenience, a woman who could be leaned on, cared for, forgiven, and that's when I decided. If he thought this was kindness, this was a mistake he would pay for. I would be gentle, patient, sweet even, but every action, every word, every gift I allowed him to receive would carry the weight of my quiet revenge. Not out of cruelty, but out of justice. He had underestimated me once. He would not do it again. I smiled to myself that night as I left his apartment, my resolve solidifying with every step down the hall. He believed he had life because of me. Soon, he would understand that life alone was not enough, that even the gift of survival could be a double-edged sword. And in the weeks to come, he would see exactly what I had sent him, not just a liver, but a storm waiting beneath calm waters. By now, I had learned the rhythm of his recovery and of his arrogance. He walked with confidence that was almost infuriating, as if survival entitled him to more than just life. He moved through his days like a king in a kingdom he hadn't earned, and I was both the servant and the audience to his delusions. I continued my care with quiet precision, each action laced with intention. I made sure his meals were perfectly nutritious, yet bland enough that he would unconsciously long for flavor he didn't realize he was missing. I washed his clothes meticulously, folding them so that the seams aligned in ways that subtly frustrated him when he dressed in a hurry. I organized his medications with exact timing, double, checking that each pill aligned with his prescriptions, yet deliberately placing the harmless supplements at the bottom of the bottle. Small annoyances, invisible to anyone else but sharp needles under his skin, he noticed, of course. He always noticed things he thought were his domain. "Did you rearrange the kitchen again?" he asked one evening, a half-smile tugging at the corner of his lips, more curious than accusatory. "Yes," I said lightly, as if it were nothing. "It seemed easier this way." He nodded, not realizing that the ease was carefully calculated discomfort. He began to talk more, about work, about old friends, about life's unfairness. And I listened carefully, smiling at the right moments, nodding, offering suggestions when appropriate. Each word, each gesture was a thread in the web I was weaving, gentle but unyielding. He believed he was guiding me, that I was merely attentive, patient, grateful even. He could not see that I was the one leading, silently, toward a reckoning he would not escape. One evening, he asked me to help with his physical therapy exercises. I agreed, of course, though I had no intention of letting him feel comfortable. I guided him through stretches with the patience of a saint and the precision of a surgeon. Every movement I suggested was slightly off from what he preferred, subtle enough to frustrate him without alarming him. He sighed, muttering under his breath, but never accused me outright. He believed I was innocent, unaware that every gesture was deliberate, a slow unraveling of control he had once assumed was his alone. And then there were the gifts. I began leaving small tokens in his apartment, books he had always claimed to love but never read, little notes with quotes about kindness and betrayal, a bouquet of flowers that smelled faintly of jasmine and something he couldn't quite name. At first he smiled, genuinely pleased, but then a flicker of unease crossed his face, subtle but unmistakable. The first time it happened, he looked at me while holding a note and asked, "Where did you?" I smiled, leaning against the doorframe. "Just thought you'd like it." I could see the shift begin. The arrogance cracked, just slightly. A shadow of suspicion appeared in his eyes when he realized these weren't ordinary gifts, not just acts of kindness. There was meaning behind them, intention. I was speaking in a language he had forgotten existed, the language of consequence, quiet but inevitable. That night, I left his apartment feeling lighter, though my heart still carried the weight of everything I had endured. He believed he was in control, that I was the same person he had left behind months ago. He did not know that the storm had already begun, and soon the calm he had taken for granted would transform into something he could neither ignore nor escape. For now, I remained patient, sweet, smiling. I continued to serve him in every minor way, building trust, embedding discomfort, and preparing the moment when the full weight of my gift and my revenge would reveal itself. And I knew deep in my bones that when that moment came, he would see it clearly, that the woman he once thought weak had been the one holding all the power all along. It was a quiet evening when I decided it was time. He had grown comfortable again, the way people do when they believe life owes them gratitude for nothing more than survival. He sat on the couch, scrolling mindlessly through his phone, pale light reflecting off his face, a picture of health he had never earned alone. And I smiled. The gift I had sent him months ago, the one he had never truly understood, was finally ready to speak for itself. I carried the small package into the room, placing it gently on the coffee table. It was wrapped carefully, nothing ostentatious, nothing to hint at what lay within. Just a box, just a simple, quiet box. He looked up, curious. "What's this?" he asked, a faint note of anticipation in his voice. The kind reserved for birthdays or holidays, not for moments that carried the weight of judgment. "Open it," I said softly, almost kindly. His fingers hesitated for a heartbeat before peeling back the paper, lifting the lid. Inside was a photo album, leather-bound, the edges worn not from age, but from careful preparation. He began flipping through the pages. At first, they were simple images, candid moments from our past, the smiles we shared, the vacations he had abandoned me on, the meals he had ruined with carelessness. Then came the reminders, the texts he had sent before he left, the notes I had found tucked away in drawers, letters I had written and never sent. Each page was a memory, meticulously catalogued, a record of both love and betrayal. He paused on a particular page, one showing the hospital room after his transplant. My handwriting surrounded it, precise and deliberate. You lived because I gave. It read, not because you deserved it, not because the world owes you a second chance. You lived because I chose to keep a piece of you alive inside me. I watched his eyes widen, the first flicker of understanding breaking through his arrogance. His lips parted, searching for words, but none came. He turned the page, and there it was, a ledger of subtle gifts. I had left in his apartment notes, flowers, books, everything, and the way each one carried intention, meaning, a reminder that nothing was ever accidental. You've been doing this all along, he whispered, voice trembling. All this time, I nodded, calm, serene. Every act, every meal, every fold of your clothes, every quiet gesture has been a lesson, not in anger, but in understanding. You thought survival was enough, but survival without acknowledgement, without respect, is hollow. For the first time he looked small, not weak, but exposed, stripped of the entitlement he had always carried. I could see it in his eyes, the realization that the person he had once dismissed, the one he had believed powerless, had been orchestrating this quiet reckoning all along. You gave me life, he said, his voice barely audible, and now I see that it was never just life you were giving. You've taught me. I smiled, a mixture of sorrow, triumph, and liberation. I gave you a liver, I said softly, but I kept the rest of me intact, and the rest of me was always in control. He looked down, ashamed but alive, forced to confront the weight of the debt he could not repay with words or charm. And for the first time, I didn't feel pain, I didn't feel longing. I felt the quiet satisfaction of justice, subtle, deliberate, and unshakable. The room was silent except for the rustle of pages. And I knew the lesson had been learned. Not through anger, not through confrontation, but through the calm, steady hand of someone who had loved, suffered, and finally taken back her power. I stood, taking one last look at the man who had once abandoned me. He was alive, yes, but he was no longer free. And I was free. The gift had been given, and this time the gift was mine.